Uhlans were Polish and Lithuanian light cavalry armed with lances, sabres and pistols. The title was later used by lancer regiments in the Russian, Prussian, and Austrian armies. Uhlans typically wore a double-breasted jacket with a colored panel at the front, a colored sash, and a square-topped Polish lancer cap. This cap, a cavalry helmet, was derived from a traditional design of Polish cap made more formal and stylized for military use. The lancers usually had small, swallow-tailed flags just below the spearhead. History. Origins. In the Turkish Tatar language, it means, amongst other things, a brave warrior, a young man. It can also be referred to Ulan Zalata, another generally accepted name for the Karmik-Urat people, who played a significant military role on the steppes on both sides of the Lower Volga River basin from the middle of the 17th century until their return back to their eastern Dzunga Khanate in 1771. The Karmik-Urat Dzunga cavalry made widespread use of lances both in European as well as Central Asian wars. During the Polish-Lithuanian Union, the name Uhlan was the surname of a Lithuanian Tatar noble family whose male family members, like many Lithuanian nobles, had regularly served as light cavalrymen for the Polish kings since at least the 15th century. One of the family members, Colonel Alexander Uhlan, was the commander of a Polish light cavalry regiment in the service of Polish Saxon kings, August II Mosny and Augustus III. After Uhlan's death, his regiment was nicknamed Uhlano Dsc and Uhlano Wojsko, and then shortened to Uhlans. Prior to 1764, all Polish-Lithuanian Tatar cavalry regiments in Saxon service were named Uhlani. Once the Golden Horde Tatar families had settled in Lithuania in the late 14th century, they were required to perform military service for the Grand Duke of Lithuania and the Polish king. The Poles started incorporating much of the military vocabulary and many of the traditions, along with the strategy and tactics. Lithuanian Tatars, mostly Muslim, served as part of the royal armies during various battles of the late Middle Ages. Their tasks were to conduct reconnaissance in advance of the heavier cavalry banners. With the end of armored knights during the 16th century, the Lithuanian Tatars were organized in light banners, armed with light-lanced bow, saber and sometimes war-axe, serving as companions and retainers, while equally lightly armed hussars were converted into heavy companies of winged hussars. Tatar companions serving within their own Tatar companies lasted until the 1770s, when major cavalry reforms were carried out within the Polish-Lithuanian army and were included in the reformed cavalry regiments. The last Polish king, Stanislaw August Poniatowski, had a Ulan Guard regiment simply known as the Royal Uhlans. It was disbanded in 1794 or 1795. 18th century. The first Ulan regiments were created in the early 18th century in Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 1720s. As the developments in battlefield tactics and advanced firearms combined with the increasing sizes of early modern armies to make heavy armor obsolescent, lighter units became the core of the cavalry, distinguished only by the sizes of the men and mounts and by tasks they performed. During the period preceding the partitions of Poland, Ulan formations consisting of Poles or Polish Tatars were created in most surrounding states simply because the Polish crown did not have the resources or political possibilities to afford a numerous army. The speed and mobility were key to the popularity. The Ulan regiment formed by the Kingdom of Prussia in 1740, the so-called Natsman, Uhlans, was used ineptly, employing heavy cavalry tactics against fortified positions. The regiment failed to distinguish itself favorably in the first of the Silesian Wars and was disbanded shortly afterwards. In 1745, Saxony engaged in a personal union with the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, created a Polish Ulan regiment called Saxon Volunteers. Shortly after, the Maréchal de Saxe created a Polish Ulan regiment for the French King, Louis XV. King Stanislaw August Poniatowski of Poland formed a regiment of royal guards equipped with lances, sabres, and pistols, each guardsman uniformed in kurta and chapka. This unit became the prototype for many other units of the Polish cavalry, who started to arm themselves with equipment modeled after Ulan regiments and medieval Tartars. In the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Uhlans officially had the status and traditions of the winged Polish hussars passed on to them in 1776, thus becoming national cavalry. The Austrian Empire also formed a Ulan regiment in 1784, composed primarily of Poles. Ordinary Ulan regiments of Austrian cavalrymen were raised in 1791, 19th century. After the start of the Napoleonic Wars, Ulan formations were raised by the Duchy of Warsaw. Polish lances serving with the French army included the Vistula Legion and the Chevaulegers Lanciers de la Garde Imperiale, the lancers of the Polish Expeditionary Corps, which fought alongside the French in Spain and Germany, spread the popularity of the Polish model of light cavalry. After the Battle of Somosierra, Napoleon said that one Polish cavalryman was worth 10 French soldiers. The Chevaulegers, French light cavalry units from the 16th century till 1815, were remodeled after the Uhlans. Following the Treaty of Tilsit in 1807, Lancer regiments designated as Uhlans were reintroduced in the Prussian service. During and after the Napoleonic Wars, cavalry regiments armed with lances were formed in many states throughout Europe, including the armies of the United Kingdom, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Sweden and Russia, while cavalry carrying this weapon were usually specifically designated as lances or Uhlans. In some instances the front-rank troopers of Hussar Dragoon regiments were also armed with lances. In one notable action during the Waterloo campaign, as the French lances advanced out of a defile created by the bridge over the island village of Genapi, although they were stationary as they formed up, they lowered the lances to receive a charge by the sabre-wielding British 7th Hussars, who were then unable to press home their charge. However, once the lances advanced in slight disorder, they were overridden by the British 1st Life Guards, who drove them back through Genapi and onto the bridge. Especially British after the Battle of Albura, where the 1st Vistulin Lancers Regiment virtually annihilated 3 of 4 Colborne Brigade regiments, captured the Vistulin Lancers equipment together with the uniforms, and even a square-topped Polish lancer cap. These British lances could still be seen even during the famous charge of the Light Brigade in Crimea half a century later. In quite short time after Napoleonic Wars, all the formations of Chevaulegers and Lancers started to be called in Polish language Uhlans. The traditions of the Polish Uhlans were preserved during the Kingdom of Poland. They fought both in the November Uprising of 1830 and in the January Uprising of 1863. Uhlans were deployed in the Franco-Prussian War by the Prussian Imperial Army in a variety of traditional capacities, and one new one during the Siege of Paris. Following the investment, Uhlans were tasked with shadowing passenger balloons launched from the city. The capacity for rapid movement made Uhlans the only troops able to keep pace with the balloons, either to seize them on landing or at least report trajectory and destination. World War I. German Uhlans. In 1914, the Imperial German Army included 26 Uhlan regiments, 3 of which were Guard regiments, 21 line and 2 from the autonomous Royal Bavarian Army. All German Uhlan regiments wore Polish-style chapkas and tunics with plastron fronts, both in colored parade uniforms and the field gray service dress introduced in 1910. Because German Hussar, Dragoon and Cuirassier regiments also carried lances in 1914, there was a tendency among the French and British opponents to describe all German cavalry as Uhlans. The lance carried by the Uhlans consisted of a 318 cm long tube made of rolled steel plate, weighing 1.6 kg. The lance carried below its head a small pennant in differing colors according to the province or state from which the regiment was recruited. The four-edged spear-like point of the shaft was 30 cm long and made of tempered steel. The butt end of the shaft was also pointed so that the lance could be wielded as a double-ended weapon. After seeing mounted action during the early weeks of World War I, the Uhlan regiments were either dismounted to serve as cavalry rifles in the trenches of the Western Front, or transferred to the Eastern Front where more primitive conditions made it possible for horse cavalry to still play a useful role. All 26 German Uhlan regiments were disbanded in 1918–1919. List of German Uhlan regiments. Austrian Uhlans. There were 11 regiments of Uhlans in the Austro-Hungarian cavalry, largely recruited in the Polish-speaking parts of the empire. They wore chapkas in regimental colors but otherwise were, after 1867, dressed in the light blue tunics and red breeches of the Austro-Hungarian dragoons, without Polish features. The lancers were similar in design to those of the German cavalry but had wooden shafts. As with other armies, the Austro-Hungarian Uhlans were forced into a largely dismounted role by the realities of trench warfare by the end of 1914. The blue and red, peacetime uniforms were replaced by field grey during 1915. There was however one last opportunity for traditional glory when on the 21st of August 1914 the Uhlans and Dragoons of the 4th Cavalry Division clashed with the counterparts of the Imperial Russian 10th Cavalry Division in classic cavalry style at the Battle of Yaroslavl. Polish Uhlans. Joseph Pilsudski's Polish legions had a small Uhlan detachment, commanded by Władysław Belina-Prasmovsky. They were modeled after the Uhlans of the Napoleonic period. This unit was the first element of the Central Powers to enter Polish lands during World War I. After Poland's independence in 1918, Uhlan formations were raised in all parts of the country. They fought with distinction in the Greater Poland Uprising, the Polish-Ukrainian War and the Polish-Bolshevik War. Although equipped with modern horse-drawn artillery and trained in infantry tactics, the Uhlan formations kept the sabres, the lances and their ability to charge the enemy. Among other battles, the Uhlan units took part in the Battle of Komarov of 1920 against the invading Soviet Khanarmia, the last pure cavalry battle in history. Russian Uhlans. The Imperial Russian Army had converted its 17-line Uhlan regiments to dragoons in 1881, but in 1910 they had the traditional lancers. Titles and uniforms returned to them. During this period only the 2 Uhlan regiments of the Russian Imperial Guard retained their original distinctions. In 1914, Uhlan had become simply a historic distinction in the Russian cavalry, without tactical significance. Interwar. In the period between the World Wars, the Polish cavalry was reformed, with some units retaining their Uhlan traditions. However, in contrast with its traditional role, the cavalry was no longer seen as a unit capable of breaking through enemy lines. Instead it was used as a mobile reserve and employed infantry tactics. The soldiers dismounted before the battle and fought as infantry, yet retained the high mobility of cavalry. Technically speaking, in 1939 Poland had 11 brigades of mounted infantry and no units of cavalry as such. As noted above, the Uhlans of the Imperial German Army were disbanded at the end of World War I. However, lances continued to be carried by certain cavalry regiments of the new German army permitted by the Treaty of Versailles. As late as 1925, Major General von Seeckt, commander of the Reichsheer, rejected a General Staff proposal that lances be abandoned as unsuited for a modern army. World War II. Although the Polish cavalrymen retained the sabres, after 1934 the lance was no longer standard issue, but was retained only for training purposes and for flying squadron pennants. Instead, the cavalry units were equipped with 75mm field guns, light tanks, 37mm anti-tank guns, 40mm anti-aircraft guns, as well as anti-tank rifles and other modern weapons. Although there were cavalry charges during World War II, very few were successful. A popular myth is that Polish cavalry armed with lances charged German tanks during the September 1939 campaign. This arose from the misreporting of the charge at Krojanty on the 1st of September, when two squadrons of the Polish 18th Lancers armed with sabres scattered German infantry before being caught in the open by German armored cars. When the remnants of the Polish cavalry forces was reconstituted in exile in 1943 as the 1st Armored Division, the 24th Uhlans were equipped as an armored regiment with Sherman tanks. The regiment disbanded in 1947. Modern Kazakhstan. Regiments exist in the modern Kazakhstan army but not as mounted cavalry. Poland. Cavalry squadron of Polish armed forces. Appearances in popular culture. References to the Uhlans occur in Arthur Conan Doyle's short story The Lord of Chateau Noir. In Leo Tolstoy's seminal work War and Peace, Uhlans are referenced multiple times from the start of Book 3. In Joseph Roth's 1932 novel The Radetzky March, the protagonist is an officer of the Austro-Hungarian Uhlans. Anton Hofmiller, the narrator of Stefan Zweig's Beware of Pity, is an officer in an Uhlan regiment in 1913 Austro-Hungary. Black Uhlan of the Rhine, nickname of heavyweight champion Max Schmeling. Valparaiso University sports teams were nicknamed Uhlans until World War II, then changed to Crusaders. Age of Empires 3, the German civilization Uhlans of the primary cavalry a player can build. In Gunther Grass's 1959 novel The Tin Drum, the protagonist Oskar Matzerath frequently refers to the Polish Uhlans, as well as the misreported charge on the 1st of September 1939. In Italo Calvino's 1979 novel If on a Winter's Night a Traveller, Gritsovy prizes his Uhlan helmet and is reluctant to leave it in Ponko's care. Many light to medium battle mech and combined arms regiments in the Battletech Mech Warrior universe use the descriptive Uhlans in the unit names.